Welcome, everybody, on behalf of King County Metro here in the Seattle region and the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities at Notre Dame. I want to welcome you to the launch of our Evidence Matters series. We're really excited to get this off the ground. My name's Carrie Chihawk, and I lead learning and impact strategies and partnerships at King County Metro Transit. I'm really passionate about advancing racial equity through bringing together the expertise of our staff, our research partners, and our community. And so I'm really delighted to be in community with all of you here today. I was looking back at recently at the original concept note for this series, which was dated February 20th, 2020. And just thinking about what a different time that was. And we had originally conceived this as like a 2-day summit. And given COVID and everything that's happened in our lives, we reconceptualized it as a series of virtual events. And it's really so great to see so many friends and colleagues from around the country here. And despite the changes in COVID, our purpose for these events remains the same. We're working to build skills and knowledge that support a focus on impact and outcomes in the social sector. We want to celebrate some of our successes in evidence-based practice, and also share our challenges and engage you in helping us overcome those. And we are really interested in building a community of practice so that we can learn from each other. We are particularly interested in promoting evidence-based practice among transit agencies. And I know many of you joining us here today are from transit agencies. There's a lot more work to be done, in this area to focus on mobility as an outcome and as a human right. And we all know that transit and transportation are a key determinant of access to opportunity and to achieving racial equity. So we've got our work to do, and we're excited about it. And at the same time, we expect that many events in this series are going to be of interest to a broad range of social sector organizations and research partners. At King County, we're really fortunate to have our friends at the Lab for Economic Opportunities, LEO, as our partner on a broad range of projects. Our relationship together dates back about 5 years to 2017. And together, we've been exploring the impact of King County innovations in addressing a wide variety of issues like homelessness prevention, criminal justice, emergency rental assistance, and access to transportation. And we're always bringing a strong focus on racial equity into that work. So, in this first Evidence Matters event today, we're going to have about a 15-minute presentation on what impact evaluation is, hence the title of our event today. And then we're going to turn it over to a panel of 3 folks who recently attended a course on impact evaluation from JPAL and who are working in the transit field to advance a focus on impact and outcomes. So you'll hear from them. And we are definitely planning to spend some time at letting you ask questions of us. And we'll be recording the presentations. So up until the Q&A, and then we'll turn the recording off and allow you to ask your questions. Throughout, as you're listening to the event, feel free to post questions in the chat just as they come to you. I'll be monitoring that chat and helping our panel lead pull your questions up. And when we get to the Q&A, you can also just use the raise hand function, turn off your mic. We want this to be interactive. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Rachel Fulcher Dawson. Rachel is the Associate Director of Research Operations at LEO, and she comes into that role with a lot of experience in education and early childhood. And the thing I love about Rachel is that she's constantly working to bring that policy perspective, the research, the practical side of research and practice together. And so with that, I will turn it to Rachel.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's wonderful to see
so many people interested in this topic that we all feel so passionately about. So what I'm going to do is really just kind of do a overview of what is impact evaluation, who is Leo, what are we about, and how do we engage in this work. So at Leo, you know, we recognize that around the country, across America, there are service providers like our friends in King County that are doing great work to take on poverty in all its complexity. We unfortunately still know too little about what's working and why. And so at Leo, we help service providers apply scientific evaluation methods, that's impact evaluation, to better understand and share effective poverty interventions. So why we exist. So like our why Leo was formed just about 9 years ago is that, there are around 34 million people living in poverty in the United States. And there's about $1 trillion spent every year fighting poverty. Unfortunately, only about 1% of that funding goes to known evidence based programs. And so that also means that only about 2% of our amazing service agencies around the country have conducted an impact evaluation. So this is very much new ground for the partners that we work with. So, how does Leo do this work? What do we do to engage it? And I will say one thing we do that our lab takes very seriously is we put providers, people on the ground running programs at the forefront of all that we do. So we don't sit from on high as researchers and say we know exactly what the answers are or we know exactly where the research should guide us. And instead, we go and we identify the innovators. So people around the country who are designing and running programs to really try and improve the lives of our most vulnerable neighbors and friends. So we do that by teaching about impact evaluation. So through things like this webinar, where we just engage with audiences to help everyone understand what an impact evaluation is and what sets it apart from other kinds of evaluations. And we overlay research design on anti-poverty programs. And so the way to think about that is really just that we're not coming in and disrupting every single thing about the way a provider runs a program. Instead, we listen and learn how social service providers are running programs, and then we help work with them to design ways to integrate data collection and research into the way they're running programs so that we can really ask and answer the questions about who's benefiting from the program and how much is the program impacting them. We also, of course, our foundation is at a university. So we are a learning organization. We learn and iterate alongside our providers so that as we learn things, we share what we're learning with initial analysis of data as it comes in so that our partners know what we're seeing and also can utilize that to think about how they're running programs or how they're reaching out to their clients to engage them in their programming. And then finally, we share our findings and work to scale them. So really that just means, as we get results on our studies, we don't just want them to be published in academic journals that, maybe 5 economists read. We also want people who can use that information to improve the way they do programming or change the way they can do programming or scale their programming to get the information in their hands so that they can utilize it to really help people that can benefit from that knowledge. And of course, the other part to that is getting the information in the hands of policymakers who often are the ones making funding decisions about which programs to fund or what kinds of funding to attach to different kinds of programs. And so that's our kind of culminating event of how we work our process. So why impact evaluation? So impact, of course, understanding impact starts with knowing. And so evidence-based solutions provide better insight and actionable steps for fighting poverty. That's why we do the most rigorous kind of evaluation. And the more we know, the better our impact can be. So that's really what drives us is trying to understand and know the most we can about the impact of programs and give that information back to our partners. Also, more evidence equals more support. One thing we hear consistently from a lot of the providers we work with is that today's policymakers care about impact on people's lives, and so being able to prove the impact with evidence helps our partners secure additional funding, whether that's through government sources or philanthropic sources, to support their poverty fighting missions. And then additionally, third party validation of impact really helps and gives a lot of credibility where there may be questions of how do we really know what's working or for whom. And many social service leaders and their staffs and supporters welcome this kind of independence, independent confirmation of the impact of their agency's work. It's really kind of critical that an agency that really wants to understand the impact and demonstrate it to their stakeholders, works with someone like Leo and others in this space to create kind of that continuous improvement loop. And this does ultimately also attract future investment. So randomized control trials, that's the primary way that we do our impact evaluations. And this terminology may sound familiar to you. It's in the medical field. This is how drug trials are done and other kinds of medical interventions are tested out to really understand the impact and validate whether something is working or not for the population it's trying to help. And so randomized control trials, we abbreviate that RCT, help us attribute differences in outcomes to the program and not to other factors. And so to do that, we have to select a group that's exactly like the group of participants in all ways but one. And so that their exposure to the program is being evaluated. And on this slide, we have apples. And so you can think about this as comparing apples to apples, literally, if this gives you the good visual. But really, that's what we do try and find, because to compare an apple to an orange would not give you the same kind of information, because we know there's something fundamentally different about those two fruits. And if we think about this in terms of people being served in programs, to really understand how a program works to benefit somebody receiving services, we want to understand how it works for them compared to someone very similar to them. So some components, really, there's four key components of successful impact evaluations. And, we start with, of course, a well-defined intervention. And what that really means is the program that's designed to help a vulnerable population is clearly defined. It's not just like, oh, we try a little of this or we try a little of this, of that. It's clearly defined kind of what the program is, what it's designed to do, who is providing the intervention or service, how much service they're providing. So that we in the research world call dosage. So is it something that someone's receiving service or contact with a provider once a week, or is it a one-time thing? So really all the details that clarify what exactly the program is doing. And kind of the counterpart to that in many ways is the second key to a successful impact evaluation is meaningful and measurable outcomes. So this is different than outputs, which you may hear in different types of evaluations, but outcomes, we really want to think about not just how many people were served by this program, but how were they better off because of the program. So then you can think about things like employment or income or an educational completion, or in the instance of our partnership with King County, things like housing stability, homeless shelter entry, and transit usage and mobility and health outcomes, things like that. So really dialing into what are the key outcomes that this program is meant to improve for the people being served. And then a third element is ample sample size, which is kind of a tongue twister and a rhyme. But there, we're just thinking about, to really do this kind of evaluation well, we need there to be, and programs need there to be a decent volume of people that are eligible for a service, so that we can really do the kind of analysis we want to be able to do and demonstrate it with statistical significance, which really just means, like, can we for sure say something about what the program means for people being served by it. And then that also relates to kind of the fourth component of a successful evaluation, and that's the comparison group. So again, like in the apples to apples analogy that we had in the last slide, it's thinking about, do we have a group of people who are eligible for the same program that we're evaluating that otherwise look the same as the people getting the program? So we really need comparable groups so that we can compare the outcomes of each group and know that the only real difference is that one group got the program and the other did not. So, some pain points. So, we currently have about 70 different research studies around the country, and I think over 30 different communities with over 100 different partners. But we've also talked with probably close to 1,000 different providers around the country over the years. And we know that what we're asking providers to do and working with them to do is different than how they've run programs before or collected information or enrolled people into programs. And so some of the things that we hear are these kinds of things that, it seems unethical to put people in a control group when they desperately need a service that you offer, or that kind of research doesn't seem right, or that, how can you, this is a big question, how can you conduct research that excludes people from services? And then, from really mostly the front line, people actually enrolling people into programs is, I don't want to be the one to tell them no. And that's something we take very seriously, and understand that level of, when you're face to face with someone, what that feels like and looks like. And so, go to the next slide. So for us, I can kind of address, how we know that to be an ethical, randomized trials and impact evaluation to be an ethical way of doing research, is that, for our providers, we know that they're serving as many people as they can, but for the most part, there are many more people eligible for the programs that they're offering that don't get the services. And so, we get a lot of feedback that the way that people enroll into programs is kind of first come, first serve, or there's a wait list, or there's some other rule being used to allow people to get a program, the services that they need. And so, to that point, really, this is randomizing people into getting the program or not. It's just a different way of prioritizing who gets the program. So the same number of people are going to be served by the program as would be if we were never there, right? So we're not turning people away unnecessarily. And in fact, we definitely talk to providers who are interested in this kind of work, and they're serving a very small number of people. And to our knowledge and to their knowledge, they're serving everybody eligible. And so in those instances, this wouldn't be appropriate or, the ethical way to do things. And we would say, okay, we need to think about this a different way. But so many programs that we talk to and that we ultimately work with actually have a lot of excess demand for their service, and they, want to help as many people as possible. They want to target the right people. They have scarce staff time. They want to protect client privacy. So those are kind of the motivations we hear from providers. And we're able to do and acknowledge all of those things in an impact evaluation. It's just by doing it this way, we also can maintain a comparison group. That's something that's important to our kind of evaluation. And we select people randomly instead of through a wait list or first come, first serve kind of thing. We then are able to fill these treatment and control groups. So to get the apples to apples groups to compare to each other and understand the impact of the program. And then ultimately, the way we collect data and understand the impact, we utilize surveys and measurements that the agencies often are already collecting, some information on clients that they serve and clients that come to them. And then we, of course, work with our partners to access the data that they're collecting, or to work with the state or local governments to access data they collect on everyone in the sample that we would be analyzing. And so those are kind of the priorities that we balance when we do work with providers and do impact evaluations. And we, take very seriously the ethical obligations of providers and of doing research the right way. And this, allows us to then do this rigorous kind of research that allows us to then demonstrate impact for vulnerable populations and really help, providers around the country and help the people they're serving to choose and run the most impactful programs. Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And if anyone has questions for Rachel, go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we will turn to that at the end of our time together. But right now, I want to turn to our panel, and this panel of folks is really special to me because, in many ways, our panel facilitator, Rohit Nampally, is kind of a founding partner in this series as well, because it was really through JPL North America that King County and Leo got connected with each other. So I'm really excited to have Rohit here as our moderator. He's the Senior Research and Policy Manager at JPL North America. And Rohit is always balancing that fine line between realism and hope. And he has an amazing way in which he blends his data and people skills together for impact. And then we've got three panelists with us who, as I stated, recently participated in a course at JPL North America on impact evaluation. Maria is a program manager here at King County Metro in our Reduced Fares team. And Maria brings a lot of policy, program management, and direct service experience into making our transit services more accessible to everyone in our community. She's always bringing an equity lens to the work. And particularly, I appreciate how she's always helping us to bring in the context of our customers' lived experience. Laura Mims is also at King County Metro, where she's the lead for our research and innovation work. Her primary focus is around customer and market research, and that informs the design of many of our Metro services. Laura's a strong champion for our equity and social justice work at Metro and helping everyone in our organization live our values in our work. So thank you, Lori. And then Judah Santos is a program manager in equity, access, and mobility at the Bay Area Metropolitan Transportation Commission. She oversees the delivery of the Lifeline Transportation Program across a 9-county region, really huge region. And Judas is also a fellow at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which I think really recognizes how Judas is constantly seeing the interconnections among things, such as the interconnection between transportation and health and how important that is to advancing equity. So with that, Rohit, I'll turn it over to you to kick off our panel discussion.
Hey, thanks, Carrie, and thank you all for having me and for just putting together this terrific panel. So my role is mostly to get out of the way with the panel, so I'll try and do that as quickly as possible. Before we begin, I want to introduce JPAL. So we're the Poverty Action Lab, a global research center at MIT that works to improve the lives of disadvantaged communities by figuring out which social programs and policies work. So you can see our mission is very closely aligned with that of Leo's. I sit at the JPAL North America office, where we focus on partnering with nonprofits and governments in North America to create new evidence in social programs, disseminate evidence so it can improve policymaking, and training government leaders to be more effective producers and consumers of evidence. All the participants on today's panel recently attended JPAL's Evaluating Social Programs course, which is a 5-day, typically in person and these days Zoom training that provides an in-depth look at how and when randomized evaluations can be used to rigorously measure social impact, methods, and considerations for their design and implementation, and how findings can inform evidence-based policies and programs. It's taught by JPAL-affiliated professors and senior staff, and it's tailored to the needs of researchers, policymakers like yourselves, and practitioners from NGOs, governments, international organizations, and private sector companies from around the world. So if you're interested in learning more about the course and program, please reach out. Happy to provide more information. And I think the proof is in the pudding when you'll hear just the synopsis from Lori, Maria, and Judith shortly. But without further ado, I'll move on over to the panel. And so with that, I'll just start with the same question for each of our panelists. Carrie, were you planning to introduce them first or any some further? Okay, great. I'll just launch right into the questions then. So I'll start with the same question for all of you, and maybe the order we can go in is alphabetical. So if I remember my alphabet correctly, I JP. Also, it's Judith, Lori, and Maria in that order. So what motivated you to learn more about impact evaluation? And we'll start with Judith.
Thanks, Harheet. So at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, we monitor and report on our policies and programs as part of our practice. With our renewed commitment to equity and the implementation of our equity platform, I wanted to not only grow my understanding of the fundamentals of evaluation, but I also wanted to learn how I could institutionalize the practice of impact evaluation, particularly applying an equity lens to not only our internal work that we do, but also the external work of policy development and project delivery. Secondly, I wanted to learn how other organizations have resourced and funded practices like this and what metrics others have used that incorporate health outcomes. And then lastly, the relationship between project management performance and impact evaluation, how they build from each other.
Great. And Lauren?
Looking for my mute button. Thank you for your patience. My reasons are very similar to what Judith just mentioned, but also for personal and professional growth. King County is focusing on equity and social justice and improving the quality of life of residents in the county. So I thought this class would help me understand or think about how to go about looking at outcomes. How do we really measure and understand the impact that we're having on improving outcomes for residents in the county? And it's important that we know how well we're doing so we can shift or make adjustments or tailor our services to reach our goals and objectives. So those are the main reasons I was interested in participating in this course.
Thanks, Lori. And Maria, same question for you. What motivated you to learn more about impact evaluation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As Carrie mentioned earlier, I get to work on a couple of different pilots and projects here at King County Metro. And through that work, I've gotten to work with some really great researchers. But I'll admit that one of my reasons for wanting to get a better understanding of impact evaluation was because in my head, I was making a distinction between the research that I was seeing as researchers with an uppercase R, while I was only seeing myself as a researcher with a lowercase r. So I personally wanted to feel more confident about being able to make sure I was really understanding what was the evaluation efforts that I was a part of, and then being able to feel more confident in being able to be a liaison between those capital R researchers and other folks on our team that maybe didn't even identify as researchers at all. But I did since realize that, like, while that was my main motivation, I realized that the distinction that I made in my head between these capital R researchers and these lower R researchers wasn't true. And that in reality, you don't have to be this academic upper face R researcher in order to get started with doing impact evaluations.
Thanks, Maria. So I heard professional and personal growth, melding the two conceptions of researchers. And so now that you've learned all of this and completed your professional and personal journeys in this course, how do you bring that forward and move forward with what you've learned? And maybe we'll start with you again, Judith.
Thanks, Farheed. So in my particular situation, I learned that there are a number of organizational elements that are important to set the stage prior to rolling out an impact evaluation effort. The first is that there needs to be a strategic priority in linking whatever project or policy that you're working on with funding at the highest level and at the very beginning. Secondly, that there's a structure and process in place to support the equity evaluation initiative. Third, identifying specific strategies with equity metrics early, upfront, and collaboratively. And then lastly, having collaborative partnerships and championing the evaluation process, not necessarily tied to a particular outcome. So it was important in our situation to have this groundwork in place, setting the stage prior to beginning the initial work of impact evaluation.
Thanks, Judith. All right, Laura, you know the drill.
And yes. So for me, I feel like I can start with dir- where I have direct influence. So the research projects that I'm currently working on, actually taking what I learned and applying it to that work. And then also working with others in the agency to shift our culture and the way we think about research and utilizing research to evaluate our programs and really focus on bringing research to the table early on in the development of the programs and projects so we can identify our goals and objectives, our measures of success. We don't consistently do that in the agency. So I think actually being deliberate and intentional in sharing information with folks throughout the agency so we can shift that culture and really understand and value what this type of research can bring to the table and how we deliver our services and programs and how it can affect change for folks in our community.
Thanks, Lori. And last but not least, Maria.
Yeah. So I realized that if I want to play a role in helping my organization use evaluation to influence decision making, that I need to play a role in helping demystify what impact evaluation means and what it actually looks like. And I really love that Rachel really got into and talked about what are those pain points that are happening. And when I'm a part of those conversations, part of that is to really listen deeply with community, what they're saying, what's their feedback, how can we incorporate it, and at the same time being able to get that message across of yes, this might be hard, but part of the learning is like how can we then do things that are bigger and better for everyone on a larger scale. And being able to do that and have those sometimes difficult conversations across multiple levels of the organization. I feel like I also now have a responsibility and opportunity to then also share back with other folks on my team that may not have as much exposure to what impact evaluation means or what it looks like. And being able to at least have them be familiar with what are the concepts, what is the purpose, what is the goal. And like Lori mentioned, being able to really play a role in building that culture of interest, of collaboration, of where we really are trying to incorporate those best practices about impact evaluation throughout the organization, and being able to collaborate when all of these research projects are each trying to learn something a little bit differently, but ultimately are all trying to get at the same understanding of like how do we make lives better for the people that we're serving. And so I'm really excited to be able to continue moving forward in that work.
Thanks, Maria. Something you said is interesting. And I'd love to, and either you or Lori or Judas, and if you all want to jump in on this, that would be great. You said about how impact evaluation got you thinking about the goals as well of what you do. To what extent have you found that in the process of doing an impact evaluation got you to, sort of revisit or rethink the goals of the program, or vice versa, where as you think about the program, it's fed into the goals of impact evaluation, if you will. And this is a question for any of you. I don't mean to put just Maria on the spot because she brought this up.
I think one of the things that forced me in some of my research projects to take a step back on is, well, we know for Metro at least that the intermediate outcome is we want people to feel like they can access transit easier, that it's more accessible, that they can ride more. But it really then has been more reflecting of, and what do we expect that to look like once they do have better access to transit, once their mobility is increased? What do we imagine those downstream outcomes, that real impact to be? And in some ways, it was interesting in like some conversations had been like, well, they'd have better jobs. They would be more likely to be employed. They might be able to better access healthcare. And I think in recent conversations, we've taken it one step further and been like, well, what happens after that? And I think it's really people feel connected. They have a community. They feel like they are in ownership of their lives and that they're able to move forward in life in the way that they so choose.
Thanks, Maria. Lori or Judith, I see you just unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes. So here in the Bay Area, we launched the Clipper Start needs-based transit discount pilot, and during the course of the evaluation, we initially had focused on more implementation outcomes. However, because of this renewed commitment to equity, we've really focused on the impact outcomes related to access to opportunity as well as addressing affordability. And so we are carrying it a step further, learning from King County about really thinking through health outcomes and health impact, particularly around wellness and how the transit discount is impacting, let's say, for example, employment and access to healthy food. So really, going through the course helped us not only learn and enhance our understanding of the fundamentals, but also taught us what other agencies are doing related to health outcomes.
Oh, Rashi, will you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. I was just asking if you all could reflect on the ways in which just the process of doing the impact evaluation has, if at all, had you revisit the goals of your program, and vice versa. Whereas you think about the program more, you really think about what the goals of even doing an impact evaluation are.
I would just say for me, focusing more on outcomes and actually evaluating if what we're doing is really helping the community and just making sure that we tailor our services and policy to make those improvements. But just focusing more on outcomes versus how satisfied our customers are and thinking that we're actually moving forward with our goals. I don't think measuring satisfaction is enough.
Thanks, Laurie. So just that has me thinking of something else where a question I got not that long ago was, well, how are you sure the activities of JPAL are actually having an impact? You'll care so much about having an impact. How do you know you're actually making an impact? And my knee-jerk reaction was, gosh, are you questioning my value? And I realized that that could be a common response, right? Where if you're running an impact evaluation or you're thinking, gee, let's figure out what this program is actually achieving its intended impact, you're almost questioning the worth of it. So I've found that can be a challenge. Is that something you all have experienced, or are there other challenges you found in advancing this focus and impact evaluation that you've had to overcome as part of this process? And again, this is a question for any or all of our panelists.
And may I think the challenge lies with time. We're very focused on producing and implementing, and some folks are concerned with the time it takes to actually develop a thoughtful evaluation process, as well as budget and resources. So I'd say that I would identify that as a time and resource.
So in my experience, so in our evaluation, it was important for us not only to report on it, but also to react to it. As far as so how are we going to change or not change? And as well as the timing. So we recently expanded our Clipper Start pilot from 1 year to two. And so we just began our second year, and we've used the results of the evaluation to do some minor tweaks for so that we can evaluate certain variables at year two. So it was actually it was refreshing and validating for me that the evaluation was helping to reiterate the program and also evaluate other factors that we would normally have evaluated.
I think the only thing I'll add is that sometimes there's the question of, well, we already did something like this. Why do you need to do this evaluation again? And I think that's where it's important, again, to understand that there could be evaluation, but then there is a distinction between what impact evaluation means of really being able to test, like, what would the difference have been without this? And not just of like the pre and post, but being able to have more of that control group and being able to more accurately say that the outcome that we're seeing is because of this intervention that we did, whatever it is. And so that is sometimes a challenge of the distinction isn't very clear. So it seems like you're doing the same thing again. And so it can be, why are we doing this? We already know this outcome or this response. It's like, well, you know the outputs, you don't know the outcomes, like what are some things of like people might be writing more, yes, but do we know like what happens after that? Like, do we know the impact it's actually having on people's lives? And it's like we don't. And so I think that's having that kind of distinction of takes impact evaluation to that next level and why it's worth doing, even if similar projects may have been done, being able to explain the value of that can sometimes be a challenge.
Great. And so just on that a little bit to the output outcomes distinction, can you speak a little bit to then how you're thinking about that challenge? How are you thinking about recording or measuring those outcomes and getting at that what happened next, the ultimate outcomes you truly care about?
It can go. I guess that's one of the things of that's also one of the pain points around impact evaluation usually is that having to have a control group and a treatment group, being able to being able to bring that in. I'm sorry, can you repeat your question again? And make sure I'm fully answering it.
Yeah, just how you're getting at those ultimate outcomes that are being measured. Do you have any early results, for instance, that have you thinking about those early outcomes, or if given that it was a challenge, how you've been thinking about overcoming that challenge to get at the ultimate outcomes you care about?
Yeah. I think to Lori's point, one of the challenges is that it requires being thoughtful and intentional before you even start it, and so that's a big challenge of having to have enough lead time for it that you're able to think through, well, yes, we can measure orca boardings, but what happens beyond that? How are we making sure that we're getting that information from both groups, the treatment and control before as well as after, and incorporating that from the very beginning? Because once you start a project, if you don't have that impact evaluation design originally in place, can be hard to pivot. So I think that's one of the things of before starting any project is like being able to stop and pause and be like, do I have the time? Do I have the capacity? Is this something that would be worth those efforts? And some of them, and that's an important thing to know, is that sometimes some projects might be more of, we just want to understand the feasibility of like, what would this look like? And it might not always need an impact evaluation. But if you're really trying to understand like the impact, like how are people's lives really changing, then you have to have that opportunity to stop and reflect at the beginning.
Yeah, Rohit, I can jump in here a little bit too on the question of, do we have any early results? What are we seeing in terms of outcomes? And in our work with Leo, as well as a researcher who's here with us on the call, Matt Friedman from University of California, Irvine, we actually tested the effects of giving people a fully subsidized transit pass. So a pass that would allow them to ride transit at no cost compared to our regular discounted fare program. And what we found, we were able to generate pretty results pretty quickly. And what we found was that people are more than doubling their use of transit if they're offered a fare free pass as compared to a discounted pass. And we're also now starting to find some of the other outcomes of how that has changed their lives in other ways. So, for example, we're finding that people have improved their financial stability as we've seen data from looking at credit scores. People's credit scores have actually improved, and it seems to be due to having that free transit pass because we did it in this randomized control trial research design. So it's really exciting. And, that work that we did early on has now influenced the rest of our research program and how we're rolling out actually a fare free pass for people.
Thanks, Gary. It's always nice to hear early results that you sort of see the light at the end of the long impact evaluation tunnel. And I see Matt's on the call as well. Thanks for joining, Matt. So we're going to play a little game of impact evaluation Mad Libs, if you will. So I'm going to give each of our panelists to start with a sentence, and I'd like you to complete it. Now, it doesn't have to be completed in just a sentence, so feel free to elaborate as much as you'd like. And since we've been starting with Judas, I'm going to mix it up a bit and start with Lori instead. So, Lori, if you could complete the sentence, please. Impact evaluation is important in our work because, oh, you might still be muted, Lori. Sorry.
Thank you. It helps us understand how well we're doing at affecting change. Are we investing our resources wisely so that we can accomplish our goals and objectives? So I think that's why it's important to make sure that we provide the proper services, that we're responsible with our money and investments, and actually create the changes that we're seeking.
Thanks, Lori. We have a different question for each of you, so that makes Matt Libs a little more exciting. Now we will transition to you, Judas. So, your biggest takeaway is
Impact equals factual minus counterfactual. That's like tattooed in your brain. So the impact of the program is measuring the difference between factual minus counterfactual.
that warms the cockles of my J Pal heart, Judas. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the old Saturday Night Live skits with, I think it was with Dan Aykroyd as Guido Sarducci, where he had to sum up the knowledge of any one field in one sentence. So economics is supply and demand. So yeah, impact evaluation, knowing about the counterfactual, perfect. I think you aced the course. And so Maria, we'll end with you. The best advice you have for others considering impact evaluation is
Remember that it's more than just a randomized control trial. Rachel mentioned this earlier, but I think it is worth repeating again that impact evaluation is still guided by strong ethical principles around obtaining genuine and clear consents, doing no harm, minimizing risk, and making sure that those participating in research are also reaping the benefits and not just shouldering the burden. And that impact evaluation can and probably should be done alongside, having strong partnerships with people that you are engaging in these research projects with and incorporating any other kind of practices that can help really strengthen those evaluation projects.
wonderful. Thanks, Maria.